The alarm bells rang through Kepler Station for the third time that week. Dr. Elena Vasquez ran down the metal hallway, her boots making sharp sounds on the floor. Behind her, she could hear the terrible roar that made everyone on the station freeze with fear. The Warbeast was angry again. Elena reached the observation deck where dozens of alien scientists pressed against the thick glass windows. Their faces showed the same look of terror and confusion that had been there for 3 months. Through the reinforced barrier, they could see into the containment room where their latest failure lay scattered across the floor. "Handler Team 7 is down," announced Commander Thys, a tall Veltar whose crystal body flickered with nervous energy. "That makes 17 casualties total." Elena looked through the window at the creature that had killed more trained professionals than any other being in galactic history. The Warbeast stood 12 feet tall, its black scales reflecting the harsh lights like polished metal. Its eyes glowed red with an inner fire that seemed to burn right through anyone who looked too long. Sharp claws scraped against the metal floor as it paced back and forth, and Elena could feel the waves of psychic energy coming from its mind even through the shielding. "We should destroy it," said High Researcher Venuk, his many tentacles writhing with frustration. "This experiment has failed. The creature cannot be controlled." "The Galactic Council wants results, not excuses," Commander Thys replied. "We promised them a weapon they could use. This beast could end wars if we could just make it obey." Elena watched the creature move. 3 months ago, a mining team had found it on Ragnar 7, a planet so dangerous that most species refused to land there. The miners had been looking for rare metals when they discovered a cave system filled with bones from creatures that had been dead for thousands of years. At the center of the cave, they found the Warbeast, sleeping in some kind of energy cocoon. The moment they woke it up, the killing started. The mining team barely escaped with their lives. The creature destroyed their equipment, their ships, and killed half their crew before they managed to trap it in an emergency containment field. They brought it to Kepler Station because it was the only place in the galaxy with facilities strong enough to hold something that dangerous. "What about the ethereal mindbinders?" asked Dr. Kessara, her insect-like features clicking with nervous energy. "Surely they can break into its thoughts." Commander Thys's crystal body dimmed. "We tried that yesterday. The creature's psychic defenses drove 3 ethereals into madness. They are still in the medical bay, screaming about endless rage and ancient pain." Elena had watched that attempt. The ethereals were known across the galaxy for their ability to control minds. They could make entire armies lay down their weapons with a single thought. But when they tried to enter the Warbeast's mind, something terrible happened. The creature's psychic energy hit them like a wall of fire, burning through their mental shields and leaving them broken. "Perhaps we need stronger neural inhibitors," suggested Professor Maltek, a being that looked like a walking tree with too many eyes. "We could increase the pain compliance system." "We already tried that," Elena said quietly. "Maximum settings." The creature didn't even notice this was true. They had used devices that could bring a charging war rhino to its knees, but the Warbeast had simply ignored them. The pain that would have destroyed most beings seemed to make it angrier. "What about food rewards?" asked Dr. Kessara. "Every living thing needs to eat. We offered it the finest meat from 17 different worlds," Commander Thys replied. "It destroyed the food dispensers and nearly broke through the containment field." Elena remembered that day too. They had tried everything from the sweetest fruits of Arcadia Prime to the rarest steaks from the crystal cows of Vega Station. The creature had looked at each offering with those burning red eyes, then smashed the delivery systems to pieces. "Chemical sedatives?" Professor Maltek suggested. "It processes toxins faster than we can deliver them," Commander Thys said. "We pumped enough sleeping gas into that room to knock out a battlecruiser crew." The creature just roared louder. Elena pressed her hand against the cold window. Inside the containment room, the Warbeast had stopped pacing. It stood perfectly still, its massive head turned toward the observation deck. Even through the thick barriers and psychic shielding, she could feel its attention like a weight on her mind. "What if we're doing this wrong?" Elena said. The alien scientists turned to look at her. Elena was the only human on the research team, and she often felt like they thought her opinions were worth less because her species was so new to galactic society. Humans had only made contact with alien civilizations 50 years ago, while most of these beings had been exploring space for thousands of years. "Explain," Commander Thys said, though his tone suggested he wasn't really interested. Every method we've tried is based on force, Elena said. Pain, fear, psychic domination, chemical control. What if the creature doesn't respond to those things because it's not just an animal? High researcher Vanook's tentacles curled with annoyance. It is clearly a predator species. Violence is the only language such beings understand. But look at its behavior patterns, Elena continued. It doesn't attack randomly. It only gets violent when we try to control it. When we leave it alone, it just paces and watches us. Because it is planning our deaths, Dr. Cassara clicked. Elena shook her head. I don't think so. I think it's trying to understand us the same way we're trying to understand it. The idea seemed impossible to the other scientists. In their experience, creatures this powerful were either weapons to be controlled or threats to be destroyed. The concept that it might be intelligent in a way they didn't recognize was too strange to consider. The Galactic Council has given us 1 more week, Commander Thiss announced. If we cannot make progress by then, they will order the creature's termination. They cannot risk it escaping and threatening civilian populations. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had been studying the Warbeast for 3 months, and despite its deadly nature, she had begun to think of it as more than just a monster. Sometimes when she watched it in the quiet hours of the night shift, she thought she saw something almost sad in those burning red eyes. 1 more week, she said softly. Yes. 1 more week to prove that this creature can be useful to the galaxy, or we destroy it and tell the Council that some things are too dangerous to exist. Elena looked through the window 1 more time. The Warbeast was still staring at the observation deck, but now it had tilted its massive head to one side, like it was listening to something only it could hear. For just a moment, Elena thought she saw something other than rage in its glowing eyes. She thought she saw loneliness. But before she could say anything about it, the creature turned away and resumed its endless pacing. The other scientists began discussing new methods of control, new ways to break the creature's will and make it serve the galaxy's needs. Elena stayed by the window, watching and wondering if they were all making a terrible mistake. Captain Marcus Chen guided his supply ship toward Kepler Station's docking bay. He had made this run dozens of times over the past 5 years, bringing food, equipment, and mail to the research station. It was routine work, but it paid well and let him bring his daughter Sarah along during school breaks. Dad, look how big it is. Sarah pressed her nose against the small window of their ship's passenger compartment. At 8 years old, she still found everything about space travel amazing. Marcus smiled as he watched his daughter's excitement. Sarah had been traveling with him since her mother died 3 years ago. She was too young to stay home alone on Earth, and Marcus couldn't bear to leave her with relatives for months at a time. The galaxy was dangerous, but Sarah seemed to make friends wherever they went. Remember the rules, kiddo, Marcus said as they prepared to dock. Stay close to me, don't touch anything that looks important, and be polite to the alien scientists. I know, Dad. I always am. This was true. Sarah had a gift for getting along with beings from different species. While other humans sometimes felt nervous around aliens, Sarah treated them like interesting new neighbors. She had learned to say hello in 17 different languages, and always remembered to bow properly when meeting ethereals. The docking process took 2 hours. Marcus supervised the cargo transfer while Sarah sat in the station's waiting area, drawing pictures in her notebook and watching the busy aliens walk past. The research station was huge, with corridors that stretched for miles in every direction. I'm going to check on the special equipment delivery, Marcus told her. It might take a while. You can explore the public areas, but don't go anywhere with warning signs. Sarah nodded and tucked her notebook into her backpack. She loved exploring new places, and Kepler Station was full of interesting things to see. There were art galleries showing paintings from 50 different worlds, observation decks with views of nearby stars, and even a small park with plants from various planets. She had been wandering for about an hour when she heard it. It was very quiet at first, almost like a whisper at the edge of her hearing. Sarah stopped walking and tilted her head to listen better. The sound came again, and this time she was sure. Something was crying. Sarah looked around the corridor where she stood. There were no other people nearby, just the usual station sounds of air recyclers and computer systems. But she could definitely hear something sad, something that sounded like it was in pain. Following the sound, Sarah walked down a side corridor she hadn't explored before. The walls here were different, thicker and made of some kind of special metal. There were more warning signs too, written in languages she couldn't read, but she could guess they meant stay out. The crying sound was getting stronger. It reminded Sarah of the time she had found an injured bird in her backyard on Earth. The bird had been scared and hurt, making small sounds that broke her heart. She had helped nurse it back to health, and eventually it was strong enough to fly away. This sounded like that bird, but bigger, much bigger. Sarah came to a section of corridor that was blocked by some kind of energy barrier. The air shimmered like heat waves, and warning lights flashed red on both sides. She could see through the barrier to another hallway beyond, but there was no obvious way past. That's when she noticed the maintenance panel near the floor. It was designed for robot cleaners, and the opening was just big enough for a small person to crawl through. Sarah had always been tiny for her age, and she had gotten good at squeezing through tight spaces during games of hide-and-seek. The crying sound was coming from beyond the barrier. Something was hurt and alone, and Sarah couldn't just ignore that. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then got down on her hands and knees. The maintenance tunnel was dark and smelled like machine oil, but it was wide enough for her to crawl through. After a few minutes of careful movement, she came out on the other side of the barrier. The corridor here looked even more serious than the ones before. The walls were covered with warning symbols that needed no translation. The air felt different too, charged with some kind of energy that made the hair on Sarah's arms stand up. But the crying was much clearer now. It wasn't coming from a hurt animal like she had first thought. This sounded like something intelligent, something that understood sadness in the same way people did. Sarah followed the sound down the corridor, past several heavy doors marked with more warning signs. Finally, she came to a large room with windows along one wall. Through the windows, she could see other rooms beyond, and in one of them, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The creature was enormous, bigger than any animal she had ever seen. Its black scales reflected the room's lights like a dark mirror, and when it moved, muscles rippled under its skin like steel cables. But it wasn't the creature's size that made Sarah stop and stare. It was the way it was sitting. The great beast sat in the center of its room with its head down and its massive shoulders slumped. Every line of its body spoke of sadness and loneliness. It wasn't pacing or roaring or trying to break things. It was just sitting there looking defeated. Sarah had seen that same posture before. Her friend Jenny's dog had sat exactly like that after Jenny's family had to move away. The dog knew something was wrong, knew that its family was gone, but it didn't understand why. "Oh," Sarah whispered, pressing her hands against the window. "You're not scary at all. You're just sad." At the sound of her voice, the creature's massive head lifted. Eyes like glowing coals turned toward the window where Sarah stood. For a moment that seemed to last forever, girl and beast looked at each other across the barrier that separated them. Sarah wasn't afraid. She should have been terrified. Everything about the creature screamed danger. But all she could see was the loneliness in those burning eyes. The same loneliness she had felt after her mother died when the whole world seemed empty and wrong. "Hi there," she said softly, the way she would greet a nervous dog. "I'm Sarah. Are you okay?" The creature tilted its head, and Sarah could swear she saw surprise in its expression. It took a careful step toward the window, moving slowly like it didn't want to frighten her. Behind Sarah, alarm bells suddenly started ringing throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors, and she could hear the sound of running footsteps coming closer. An automated voice began speaking in several languages, all saying the same thing. "Security breach in Section 7. All personnel evacuate immediately." But Sarah didn't run. The creature wasn't threatening her, and she couldn't abandon something that was so obviously in pain. Instead, she sat down on the floor in front of the window, crossing her legs the way she did during story time at school. "Don't worry about the alarms," she told the creature. "Grown-ups always get excited about things. I won't let them hurt you." The creature moved even closer to the window. This close, Sarah could see that its scales weren't just black. They had a deep blue shine to them, like the ocean at night. Its claws, which had looked so threatening from a distance, were carved with intricate patterns that suggested intelligence and artistry. "You're actually pretty," Sarah said with genuine admiration, like a dragon from the old stories, but sadder. The running footsteps were getting closer now. Sarah could hear adult voices shouting in languages she recognized. Her father was among them, calling her name with worry in his voice. Soon they would find her and take her away from this lonely creature, but maybe that was okay. Maybe just knowing that someone cared, That someone saw the sadness instead of the danger would be enough to help. I have to go now, Sarah told the creature, but I'll try to come back if I can. Nobody should have to be alone. The creature pressed one massive claw against the window, right where Sarah's small hand rested on the other side. For just a moment, it was as if the barrier between them didn't exist. The security team found Sarah sitting calmly on the floor, still talking to the Warbeast through the containment window. Captain Chen arrived first, his face white with panic when he saw where his daughter had ended up. "Sarah, get away from there right now," he shouted, but Dr. Elena Vasquez grabbed his arm before he could run to his daughter. "Wait," Elena said urgently. "Look at the creature." Marcus looked through the window and felt his world shift. The Warbeast, which every report described as a mindless killing machine, was sitting perfectly still. Its glowing red eyes were fixed on Sarah, but there was no aggression in its posture. If anything, it looked curious. "How did she get past the security barriers?" Commander Thys demanded, his crystal body flickering with agitation. "Maintenance tunnel," said one of the security officers, pointing to the small opening near the floor. "The automated systems didn't register her because she's too small." High Researcher Venuk's tentacles writhed with frustration. "The child must be removed immediately. That creature has killed 17 trained handlers. No sudden movements," Elena warned. "If we startle either of them, the situation could turn dangerous very quickly." Through the window, they could see Sarah talking to the Warbeast in her soft, patient voice. She was telling it about her dog back on Earth, a golden retriever named Max who liked to play fetch and sleep in sunny spots. "He gets scared during thunderstorms," Sarah was saying, "so I sit with him until the noise stops. Dogs don't understand that thunder can't hurt them, so they need someone to be brave for them." The Warbeast tilted its massive head, listening to every word. The psychic emanations that had driven 3 ethereals to madness were now barely a whisper. Instead of the usual waves of rage and pain, the creature was projecting something completely different. It was projecting curiosity. "This is impossible." Dr. Kazara clicked nervously. "The creature should be attacking. It always attacks when humans come near." "Those were armed guards and scientists with control devices," Elena observed. "Sarah is just a child talking about her pet." "We need to extract her now," Marcus said, starting toward the containment area. But Elena stopped him again. "Captain Chen, I understand your concern, but this might be the breakthrough we've been looking for. Your daughter has achieved something that teams of experts couldn't accomplish. We need to understand how." Inside the containment area, Sarah had stood up and was now walking closer to the energy barrier that separated her from the Warbeast. The creature tracked her movement but made no aggressive gestures. If anything, it seemed to be trying to appear less threatening, lowering its massive head and keeping its claws retracted. "You know what?" Sarah said, stopping just a few feet from the barrier. "I think you're lonely. That's why you're so angry all the time. When Max gets lonely, he barks and breaks things too." The Warbeast made a sound unlike anything the scientist had heard before. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was almost like a question, low and rumbling, but somehow gentle. "Yes, exactly like that," Sarah said, as if she understood perfectly. "Max does that same sound when he wants attention." Dr. Elena watched in amazement as the child continued her one-sided conversation. Sarah sat down cross-legged again, this time much closer to the containment barrier. The move should have triggered the creature's predatory instincts, but instead, the Warbeast carefully lowered itself to the floor as well. "She's mirroring its body language," Elena whispered to the other scientists. "And it's mirroring hers." "This is unprecedented," Commander Thys said. "The creature has never shown any sign of social behavior." "Maybe because we never gave it a chance to," Elena replied. "We've been treating it like a weapon or a test subject. Sarah is treating it like a friend." Inside the containment area, Sarah was explaining about the time Max had gotten lost in the woods near their house. "I was so scared," she said. "But Dad said we had to be patient and keep looking. We called his name for hours, and finally we heard him barking from a deep hole. He had fallen in and couldn't get out." The Warbeast was listening intently, its glowing eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The psychic field around it had changed completely. Where before it had projected rage and threat, now it seemed to be reaching out, trying to connect. "We got a rope and pulled him out," Sarah continued. "He was dirty and scared, but he was okay. Sometimes being stuck in a hole isn't your fault. Sometimes you just need someone to help you get out." That's when the Warbeast did something that made every scientist in the observation area gasp. It moved one massive claw toward the containment barrier, not to attack or escape, but to gently touch the energy field where Sarah's hand rested on the other side. The gesture was unmistakably reaching out for contact, for connection. It's trying to comfort her, Elena breathed. The creature is trying to comfort the child. Impossible, High Researcher Venuk said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah smiled and pressed her palm flat against the barrier. The warbeast kept its claw there too, and for a moment it looked like they were touching through the energy field. You're stuck in a hole too, aren't you? Sarah said gently, but not the kind you can climb out of. You're stuck being angry and scared and nobody knows how to help you. The creature made that low, questioning sound again. This time, the scientist's instruments detected something remarkable. The sound had harmonic patterns that matched certain emotional frequencies found in social species across the galaxy. The warbeast wasn't just making noise, it was trying to communicate. It's attempting language, Elena said in wonder. After 3 months of silence, it's trying to talk to her. We should record everything, Dr. Kesara said, her scientific excitement overriding her fear. This could change our understanding of the species entirely. Sarah seemed to understand that the creature was trying to tell her something. She listened carefully to its low rumbles and clicks, nodding as if she could hear meaning in the sounds. I know, she said finally. You've been alone for a really long time. That must hurt so much. The warbeast's eyes dimmed slightly, and for a moment the fierce glow became something softer, sadder. It made a new sound, higher and more plaintive than before. Sarah stood up and brushed off her pants. You know what Max does when he's been good? He sits. It shows he's ready to listen and be friends. The creature tilted its head again, clearly trying to understand. Sarah took a step back and looked up at the towering alien being. Even through the containment barrier, the size difference was overwhelming. The warbeast could have crushed her without thinking about it. But Sarah saw past the claws and scales to something that needed kindness. Sit, she said gently, not as a command from a superior to an inferior, but as a request from one friend to another. The same tone she used with Max when she wanted him to calm down after a thunderstorm. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The scientists held their breath, waiting to see if 3 months of failed experiments would finally end in success or tragedy. Then, slowly and carefully, the warbeast lowered its massive body to the floor. It tucked its powerful legs beneath itself and settled into a sitting position, never taking its eyes off Sarah. The observation area fell completely silent. Outside the containment room, alarms were still ringing and security teams were mobilizing, but none of that mattered anymore. A human child had just accomplished the impossible. She had asked a monster to sit, and it had obeyed. The news spread through Kepler Station like wildfire. Within minutes, every scientist, security officer, and administrator knew what had happened. A human child had made the warbeast sit with a single word. Commander Theiss immediately sealed the entire section and called an emergency meeting of the Research Council. In the main conference room, dozens of alien scientists gathered around holographic displays showing footage of Sarah and the creature. They watched the same scenes over and over, trying to understand what they had witnessed. This changes everything, Dr. Kesara said, her insect features clicking with excitement. 3 months of failure and a child solves the problem in 10 minutes. It's not solved, High Researcher Venuk argued, his tentacles coiled with frustration. We still don't understand how she did it. Until we can repeat the process with trained handlers, this is just a curiosity. Elena stood at the front of the room, studying brain scans from both Sarah and the warbeast during their encounter. The readings were unlike anything in galactic scientific literature. Look at these neural patterns, she said, pointing to the displays. When Sarah approached the creature, both of their brain activities synchronized. Not through psychic control or mental domination, but through something else entirely. What kind of something else? Commander Theiss asked. Empathy, Elena said simply. Sarah wasn't trying to control the creature or make it obey her. She was trying to understand how it felt. The alien scientists exchanged confused looks. The concept wasn't entirely foreign to them, but none of their species had evolved the same capacity for emotional connection that humans possessed. Empathy is inefficient, Professor Moltek stated. It creates emotional attachments that interfere with logical decision-making. Most advanced species evolved past such primitive responses. Maybe that's the problem, Elena said. We've been treating the Warbeast like a machine that needs programming. Sarah treated it like a being that needed friendship. Dr. Kessera pulled up behavioral analysis charts. But friendship requires mutual benefit. What does the child gain from this relationship? The creature is dangerous and offers no practical advantages. Elena thought about her own daughter back on Earth. How easily children made friends with anyone who showed them kindness. Humans don't make friends for practical reasons, she explained. We do it because connection itself has value. Sarah didn't approach the Warbeast expecting to gain something. She just saw that it was lonely. Loneliness is not a tactical consideration, High Researcher Venuk said dismissively. Efficient beings focus on survival and resource acquisition, not emotional states. That's exactly my point, Elena replied. Every species here evolved to be efficient, logical, and practical. But what if those traits made us miss something important about the Warbeast? Commander Thys activated a new display showing the creature's behavior over the past 3 months. Explain what we missed. Elena highlighted specific incidents from the data. Look at the pattern of attacks. The Warbeast never struck first. It only became violent when handlers tried to use control devices, pain compliance, or psychic domination. Every aggressive action was defensive. Defense implies it felt threatened, Dr. Kessera observed. But what could threaten something so powerful? Loneliness, Elena said. Isolation. Being treated like a thing instead of a being. For 3 months, we've been proving to the Warbeast that it's alone in a hostile universe. Sarah was the first person to suggest it might not have to be. The scientists fell silent as they considered this possibility. Their instruments had detected the creature's intelligence, but they had assumed intelligence meant the same thing for all species. The idea that a being could be intelligent but prioritize emotional connection over practical concerns was difficult for them to accept. We need to test this theory, Commander Thys decided. If the human child's method works, we need to understand why. Over the next several hours, they ran extensive tests. Sarah, with her father's nervous permission, spent more time with the Warbeast while scientists monitored every detail of their interaction. The results were consistent and remarkable. When Sarah was present, the creature's stress hormones dropped to baseline levels. Its psychic emanations shifted from aggressive to curious. Most importantly, it began attempting more complex communication, using a variety of sounds and gestures that suggested high intelligence. It's trying to tell us its story, Elena realized as she analyzed the communication patterns. The sounds it makes when Sarah is here. They have structure, grammar, emotional inflection. This isn't just an animal. It's a person. Dr. Kessera's mandibles clicked rapidly as she processed this information. If it's truly intelligent, then our treatment of it for the past 3 months constitutes imprisonment and torture, Elena finished grimly. We've been torturing a sentient being because we didn't recognize its intelligence. The weight of this realization settled over the research team. They had approached the Warbeast as scientists studying a specimen, not as diplomats meeting a new species. Their methods had been designed to break its will and force compliance, not to establish communication and trust. But how did the child know? Professor Moltek asked. She has no scientific training, no experience with alien psychology. What did she recognize that we missed? Elena watched through the observation window as Sarah shared her lunch with the Warbeast, passing small pieces of fruit through a slot in the containment barrier. The creature accepted each offering gently, its massive claws handling the tiny pieces with surprising delicacy. She didn't analyze it, Elena said. She just listened. When Sarah heard the creature's psychic emanations, she didn't try to block them or control them. She felt what it was feeling and responded with kindness. That's dangerous, High Researcher Venuk protested. Unshielded exposure to alien psychic fields can cause permanent mental damage. Not to humans, Elena realized with growing excitement. Our brains work differently. We evolved as social pack animals designed to form emotional bonds with other species. What you see as dangerous vulnerability, we experience as connection. Commander Thys studied the data with new understanding. You're suggesting that humans have a natural ability to form relationships with other intelligent species? More than that, Elena said. I think we're uniquely suited for it. Every other species in the galaxy evolved to be independent, efficient, and logical. Humans evolved to be social, empathetic, and cooperative. We're natural diplomats. The implications were staggering. For 50 years, humans had been considered a minor species in galactic society. They were too emotional, too attached to their families and friends, too willing to help others even when it offered no benefit. These traits had been seen as weaknesses that would limit human advancement. But what if they were actually humanity's greatest strength? "We need to contact the Galactic Council," Commander Thys said finally. "This discovery could change how we approach first contact with unknown species." "What about the Warbeast?" Elena asked. "We can't keep it imprisoned now that we know it's intelligent." Through the window they could see Sarah teaching the creature a simple clapping game. The Warbeast was trying to clap along with its massive claws, creating deep booming sounds that made Sarah giggle. Both of them seemed to be having fun. "I think," Commander Thys said slowly, "we need to ask it what it wants to do, and we need to ask Sarah to help us translate." For the first time in 3 months, the scientists of Kepler Station were going to try diplomacy instead of domination. They were going to treat the Warbeast not as a weapon to be controlled, but as a being worthy of respect. It had taken a child to teach them the difference. 2 weeks later, representatives from across the galaxy arrived at Kepler Station. The Galactic Council had called an emergency session to witness what they were calling the human phenomenon. Ships from dozens of worlds filled the station's docking bays, bringing scientists, diplomats, and military leaders who had traveled for days to see a human child talk to a monster. Sarah sat in the center of the main conference hall, wearing her best dress and trying not to fidget, while hundreds of alien dignitaries stared at her. Beside her, the Warbeast sat calmly on a specially built platform, no longer contained behind energy barriers. The sight of the massive creature sitting peacefully in a room full of potential prey sent ripples of amazement through the assembled crowd. "Tell them about your home," Sarah said gently to her friend. Over the past 2 weeks, she had learned to understand the Warbeast's complex language of sounds, gestures, and psychic impressions. Elena and the other scientists had been frantically taking notes, but Sarah seemed to communicate with the creature as naturally as breathing. The Warbeast made a series of low musical sounds. Its voice had a quality unlike anything the aliens had heard before, deep and powerful, but filled with an ancient sadness. Sarah listened carefully, then turned to address the council. "His name is Kethvar," she said. "He says it means guardian of the silent in his language. He's the last of his kind." A murmur ran through the assembly. Elena activated her translation system and began relaying Sarah's words to the various alien languages represented. "Kethvar's people were called the Thanari," Sarah continued, listening to more sounds from her friend. "They were created a long time ago by another species called the Vorthak. The Vorthak were in a terrible war and needed soldiers who could fight in space and on any kind of planet. The implications were staggering." The assembled scientists exchanged shocked looks as they realized they were learning about galactic history that had been lost for millennia. "The Vorthak made the Thanari to be the perfect warriors," Sarah said, her young voice carrying the weight of ancient tragedy. "Strong, smart, and able to survive anywhere. But when the war ended, the Vorthak didn't need soldiers anymore. They just left them." Kethvar made a sound like wind through broken stone, and Sarah reached out to touch his massive claw comfortingly. Thousands of Thanari were abandoned on dead planets across the galaxy. She translated. They waited for their creators to come back, but they never did. One by one, the Thanari died out. Kethvar has been alone for over 3,000 years. The silence in the assembly hall was absolute. Every being present tried to imagine the horror of such isolation, but most couldn't even begin to comprehend it. 3,000 years of solitude would have driven any of their species to madness. Council leader Zarthon, an ancient ethereal whose mind had touched thousands of worlds, leaned forward with obvious effort. "Ask him why he didn't seek out other species for companionship." Sarah posed the question to Kethvar, who responded with a complex series of sounds and psychic impressions. When he finished, Sarah's eyes were bright with tears. "He tried," she said, "but everyone was afraid of him. They saw his size and his claws and his power, and they thought he was a monster. So he stayed hidden on empty worlds, hoping someday someone would understand that he just wanted a friend." Dr. Elena felt her heart break a little. They had found Kethvar on Ragnar 7 because that was where he had been hiding, alone with his grief and loneliness. When the miners woke him up, he must have hoped that finally, after millennia of isolation, someone had come looking for him. Instead, they had trapped him and brought him to Kepler Station to be studied like a specimen. The attacks, Elena said suddenly. He wasn't trying to kill the handlers. He was trying to communicate, Sarah nodded sadly. Every time someone came to his room with machines and weapons, he got scared. He thought they were going to hurt him or leave him alone again, so he tried to make them understand how much pain he was in, but they just saw it as violence. Commander Thess stepped forward, his crystal body flickering with newfound understanding. What does he want now? What can we do to help him? Cathvar made a soft sound, almost like a sigh, and Sarah smiled for the first time since beginning her translation. He wants to help, she said. He's been alone for so long that he forgot what it felt like to be useful. He wants to use his strength to protect people instead of scaring them. Protect them from what? Asked High Researcher Venuk. Sarah listened to Cathvar's response, her expression growing serious. He says there are other things out there. Things left over from the old wars. Weapons that are still running. Planets that are still dangerous, creatures that really are monsters. He knows where they are because he's been hiding from them for thousands of years. The military representatives in the assembly began taking urgent notes. The galaxy was vast and largely unexplored, and the idea that ancient weapons might still be active was terrifying. But he won't just tell you where these things are, Sarah continued. He wants to go with you. He wants to be part of a team, like the Thanari were supposed to be before they were abandoned. He wants to belong somewhere. Council leader Zarthon conferred with the other representatives in rapid, hushed tones. Finally, he turned back to Sarah and Cathvar. Tell him that the Galactic Council formally recognizes the Thanari as a member species, he said. Cathvar will be granted full citizenship rights and offered a position as a special consultant on pre-galactic threats. When Sarah translated this, Cathvar's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The massive being lowered his head and made a sound like singing, like joy-given voice. Tears, actual tears, rolled down his scaled cheeks as he experienced the first moment of belonging he had known in 3 millennia. But the council wasn't finished. Zarthon stood and addressed the human delegation directly. For 50 years we have underestimated humanity, he said. We saw your emotional nature as a weakness, your tendency to form bonds as inefficient. We were wrong. You possess abilities that our species have forgotten or never developed. Elena stepped forward to accept what she suspected was coming. The Galactic Council hereby establishes the human empathy Corps, Zarthon announced. A new branch of our diplomatic service staffed by humans and dedicated to peaceful first contact with unknown species. You will be our ambassadors to the misunderstood, our translators for the lonely, our bridge to beings we might otherwise see as monsters. The assembled aliens erupted in approval, their various forms of applause creating a symphony of clicks, chimes, and harmonics. But Sarah only had eyes for Cathvar, who was looking at her with an expression of pure gratitude. Thank you, little friend, the Warbeast said in his musical language. You taught me that I was never really alone. Somewhere in the galaxy there were always people like you, waiting to be friends. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the exploration ship Harmony, watching as Cathvar worked alongside human and alien crew members to investigate a derelict weapon platform. The massive Thanari moved carefully around his smaller teammates, his strength perfectly controlled, his intelligence finally recognized and valued. Dad, look, Sarah called to Captain Chen, who was serving as the ship's commanding officer. Cathvar found another one. Through the view screen, they could see the Thanari gently restraining what looked like a metallic serpent the size of a subway car. The ancient security system had been mindlessly attacking anything that approached for thousands of years. But Cathvar had been able to communicate with its primitive intelligence and convince it to power down. That's the 15th automated weapon he's helped us deactivate, Captain Chen said proudly. The shipping lanes are going to be so much safer. Elena joined them at the observation window, now wearing the blue uniform of the Human Empathy Corps. In the 6 months since Kepler Station, over 200 humans had joined the new organization. They were scattered across the galaxy, making first contact with species that had been written off as too dangerous or too alien to understand. The Council just approved funding for 12 more ships like this one, Elena reported. And we have applications from 37 species requesting human mediators for various conflicts. Sarah watched Cathvar carefully helping the ship's engineer repair damage to the weapon platform. The creature that had once been called a monster was now one of the most respected members of the galactic community. His knowledge of ancient threats had already saved thousands of lives, and his gentle nature had surprised everyone who met him. It's funny, Sarah said thoughtfully. Everyone was so scared of him because he was big and strong, but all he really wanted was for someone to ask him to sit and stay for a while. Captain Chen put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Sometimes the scariest things are just the loneliest things, kiddo. Yeah, Sarah agreed, watching her friend work. Good thing we're good at making friends. Outside the ship, Kethvar finished his work and turned toward the observation deck. Even across the vacuum of space, Sarah could see him looking for her. When he spotted her in the window, the great Thanari warrior raised one massive claw in a gentle wave. Sarah waved back, grinning at the friend who had taught the galaxy that sometimes the best way to tame a monster is simply to treat it with kindness.